It's completely abhorrent. We wouldn't restrain a pregnant animal, so why are we restraining a pregnant woman during labour? It's disgusting and dangerous.
I was begging them, please take them off. It's stressing me out. It was just really humiliating.
Excited and prepared. That's how Joanna felt ahead of giving birth, despite being in prison. At 18 weeks pregnant, she'd been remanded to HMP Bronzefield on drug supply charges. We've changed her name to protect her identity.
You feel quite vulnerable, you're not really sure what to expect, and you feel quite anxious about the labour. I was always told that the handcuffs would be removed for your labour. I was told it by everybody, and I even had a little booklet which read out my rights. I didn't even think it would be a thing, I thought that they would be removed.
And Joanna was right to think that. This is the official government guidance. It says that restraints should be removed from pregnant prisoners when they arrive at hospital. It also says that cuffs should only be used in exceptional circumstances, if there's a particularly high risk of escape, for example, or a threat to anyone's personal safety. And it goes on to say that staff shouldn't even be in the room. Joanna arrives at the hospital to be induced. She's taken into her labour room.
And they told me that, no, we're not taking them off. That was when it hit me.
Did you challenge them?
I was definitely challenging them, but in a really polite way. They were just saying, we don't know what that book is, and sorry, but rules are rules. Every so often I would try and ask them again, please, and as the contractions got worse, I got more stressed and upset.
Did they react to that at all?
No. I was laying on the bed, handcuffed to an officer. There was two officers sitting next to the bed, a male and a female, and I was doubled over having contractions, like in agony, and I was sobbing, and I was saying, like, please, can you take them off, like I'm having contractions, and they were just sitting there laughing and joking about and talking about which holiday they wanted to go on, as if I wasn't sitting next to them in labour.
For the next 34 hours, Joanna is restrained. She's made to undress, shower, and go to the toilet, all whilst chained to a prison officer. She says she asks the officers to stop talking so that she can rest and sleep. They don't. And she says they override the medical advice she's given by a midwife.
And she said, your baby's heart rate is really high. I would advise that you take a walk to try and bring your baby's heart rate down. I think you're quite anxious and stressed. And I'm obviously handcuffed to an officer. And I said, can we take a walk? And she said she was too tired to walk. So I was forced to just sit, feeling incredibly anxious, just forced to sit and think, oh my God, is something happening to my baby? By the time they took the handcuffs off of me, I was screaming, begging for an epidural, which I really didn't want. Basically, I feel like my birth was just taken away from me.
Bronzefield Prison is managed by Sodexo Justice Services, a private company which says it ensures the safety of everyone within its estates. Not so for baby Aisha Cleary, born in a cell in 2019, only to die hours later. An inquest found systemic failings contributed to Aisha's death. Her mother, Rihanna Cleary, had made 2 calls to staff asking for a nurse and an ambulance, but wasn't listened to. Is Bronzefield still unsafe for pregnant women? We put that thought to Joanna's solicitor, who says she's aware of multiple women with similar experiences and is calling for an independent investigation.
What you have at the moment is a very, very serious systemic abuse of human rights, which isn't being appropriately looked at, and it's being covered up. The second woman we're acting for, she had a second pessary inserted to bring on her to break her waters, and that caused her to bleed. And so at a point when she was bleeding and bent over, she had to beg the officers to not swap. So because at one point she was chained to a woman officer, and they wanted to swap to chain her to a male officer. And so that's completely unacceptable, and it's horrendous that she had to have that experience.
Joanna says she couldn't fathom the officers' behaviour towards her. She was in prison for a non-violent crime, and says she'd only ever had good behaviour reports.
It felt like I was being mentally tortured.
Do you feel like the officers put you and your baby at risk?
Definitely. I think if it wasn't for the officers treating me in that way and exhausting me so much, I don't think I would have had those complications at birth. I just couldn't push. I was trying to push for an hour and I was just so exhausted from the whole ordeal.
An HMP Bronzefield spokesperson said,
"These are historical claims relating to the security arrangements surrounding pregnant prisoners whilst on escort outside of the prison. These claims are subject to ongoing legal proceedings, which means that we are unable to provide any specific comment on individual cases. We take the safety and well-being of the women in our care and of the general public very seriously and have robust assurance systems in place to ensure that current practice is fully within the guidelines appropriate to these situations."
The Ministry of Justice has told us it'll urgently look into these claims, adding that its policy is that pregnant women should not be restrained during hospital visits. It says the newly launched Women's Justice Board aims to ensure that fewer women end up in prison, particularly those who are pregnant or mothers.
It was evil and it was awful, and I just really would like them to stop doing that to women, basically.
Joanna wants an explanation for what happened to her, an apology. She'll be following the government's pledge to examine what's happened at Bronzefield, an experience that changed her life.
Well, earlier I spoke to Janie Starling from the feminist campaign group Level Up and former prison governor Pia Sinha, who now heads the Prison Reform Trust and is advising the government on its policy of reducing the number of female inmates. Janie Starling, how troubling is it that women are still giving birth while handcuffed?
So prison will never be a safe place to be pregnant. The last time we had a national scandal of about cuffing in birth was in 1996, and prison policy changed. Now, 30 years later, we are still having this conversation because fundamentally what happens on prison policy paper and what happens in practice are two vastly different things. And we need to see an end to the imprisonment of pregnant women in order to keep them safe.
People may be watching thinking, well, you know, these are women they've committed a crime, they are criminals, and they should be treated as such, no matter that they are pregnant. What do you say to that, Janie?
So there is mounting evidence. I mean, the NHS and the Ministry of Justice categorise all pregnancies in prison as high risk. The Royal College of Midwives has said that prison is no place for a pregnant woman. We know that pregnant women in prison are 7 times more likely to have a stillbirth, twice as likely to give birth prematurely. And it's the responsibility of any court to balance the risks of custody when they are passing a sentence. But what I would love to talk about, which is relevant to one of the women who you've just heard from, is the fact that she was actually being held on remand. She was being held before her trial or sentence. That is extremely troubling. We need to see the government not just make changes to sentencing, but to make changes to bail, because 1 in 3 pregnant women in prison are actually not convicted.
Mm-hmm. Pia Sinha, what's your response?
Well, I'm shocked that, you know, despite the policies that the prison service itself has published around how pregnant women need to be managed whilst they're in custody, that we're still seeing such cases. The policy is very clear on this issue, that if you are a pregnant woman, so long as there isn't a severe risk of harm to yourself or anybody else, they absolutely should not be cuffed during labour. So that's one very important issue to make. And the other is that when we have a situation where there are viable community alternatives, I see no reason why pregnant women should be coming into custody. The majority of women are in there for non-violent offences, and their needs can be perfectly well managed in the community.
The fact that they're handcuffed to male officers, what's your response to that, Janie?
This amounts to inhumane and degrading treatment under Article 3 of the Human Rights Act. It's diabolical.
And does that mean that you believe the law is being breached in this case?
I believe this is absolutely unlawful, and I believe that it is squarely the responsibility of the state, of the Ministry of Justice, not to pass the buck on to Sodexo, but to take responsibility for the practice of sending pregnant women to prison, which they need to address through sentencing reform and changes to the Bail Act. Nothing less will keep women safe.
Pia, your response on that point?
I would absolutely fundamentally agree with that. I think that it is an opportunity now, especially as the government itself has made its ambitions really clear, that we have to get to the point where we're enacting the ambition, not just talking about it, but actually making it happen.
Janie, there was a change to sentencing guidelines where pregnancy was a mitigating factor that judges were supposed to take into consideration. But is Britain out of line with other countries in incarcerating pregnant women?
Yes, correct. There are several other countries that have laws that severely restrict the use of imprisonment for pregnant women. They have alternatives like home detention curfew and electronic tagging instead. And really, you know, England needs to catch up.
Well, Pia, you're advising the government on the Women's Justice Board. Do you think this government will be politically brave enough to say, well, we're not going to send growing numbers of women to prison? Because the numbers keep going up and up at the moment.
Yes, I mean, I feel really confident about this because the makeup, the composition of the Women's Justice Board have got specialists within it who have long campaigned against pregnant women and mothers of young children to be put in custody, especially when they're viable alternatives.
Janie, we've featured the stories, disturbing stories of 2 women. Is this much more widespread than that?
So the terrifying thing is we are not sure of the scale of this issue. This is why we need an independent investigation into the scale of the use of restraint on pregnant women.
Pia, do you agree that there should be an independent investigation?
I do. I think that, you know, there is a policy that clearly states what needs to happen, and places and prisons that violate what is already Ministry of Justice policy need to be held to account.
Pia, you used to be a prison governor. Has the situation got worse since then? And is part of the problem that prisons are outsourced to, in this case, Sodexo?
It has got worse, yes, but I don't think it's a public or private issue. I think it's purely a matter of the intense strain and stress all prisons are under. When you're in a system that is in crisis and you have these events happen, you default to taking the strongest action possible. So, for example, it's always easier to handcuff someone because that is the least risky option to take, rather than, you know, think about what the policy states, think about what's reasonable, think about what's humane, think about what's compassionate. And that is the fundamental root of the problem. This is not that people aren't aware that policies need to be enacted. They're probably unaware of what the policy is, and no one with experience actually holding them to account for it.
Pia Sinha and Janie Starling, thank you both very much for joining us.